research avenues in the humanities to meet development challenges of our African continent. Let me start this address with a provocative remark. 2 months ago, during a Sadotola meeting in Yaoundé, I suggested to the members that we should investigate outside funding from our Western research partners to promote work on African cultures that Sadotola would be sponsoring. The Executive Secretary answered the following: we do have our own funds contributed by the member countries. When we seek outside funding, there is a risk that the fund providers will again kind of impose what they want us to publish. As I thought about it, I believe this is true. If you can quickly think about your own status as an African scholar or a university student writing your thesis, or the highest academic diploma you presently hold, try to see whether your people in your villages are the real target of your work. Do you get the feeling that they have really benefited from your work? Suppose your ancestors were to talk to you and tell you, we have allowed you to explore Western knowledge. How have you used it to meet development challenges for your people? Have you turned to a Western copycat? Or can you truly say that you remain an authentic African with the blood of your ancestors still flowing proudly in your veins? What I plan to present in this talk is to open up new avenues for exploration in view of the several challenges we presently face in the humanities as researchers and potential more efficient shapers of the path that will bring our people to an ultimate development that will be more consonant with our values as sons and daughters of our respective countries and of this African continent. I wish to address the following items in this talk. 1, what are the challenges that our present generation faces in terms of research, and how can we best continue the work of our predecessors, given the opportunities that ICT tools offer us? 2, a few proposals inspired by work our Western partners would wish us to do as a complement to their own work in our continent. 3, proposals from an African cultural perspective for a development-oriented type of research. 1, modern-day research challenges in the humanities from an African perspective. As an introduction to this section, I wish to present an excerpt from Glimpses of African Cultures as I summarized a strong appeal of Professor Felix Marty of Lingua Pax International for Africans. For a sustainable development of sub-Saharan Africa, there is an urgent need for Africans to 1, reject completely the neocolonialism perspective in the way they run their businesses in the continent. African countries are too dependent on the Western world, most particularly on France and the USA, and to a certain extent on China as well. It's high time that Africans find an authentic way embedded in the cultural aspects of their cultures that will lead them to the development path. Even in matters of religion, it would be desirable that the Christian religion or the Islam be different from the one of the imported colonial masters. They have to find a way of living the Christian religion or Islam in a way that harmonizes with their genuine cultural values. Okay, he cites other items, but I will read the last one, which is, most importantly, the teaching of these languages in the school system has to be judiciously organized, and great emphasis should be put on their oral knowledge. As you think about it, don't you find a grain of truth in these declarations? Isn't it true that most of the research we do is subservient to what is done by our Western colleagues? One possible reaction is that matters couldn't be otherwise because we inherited the school system from our colonial masters. The question now is, do we really make an effort to to apply the knowledge we get from the Western type of school to our advantage? In other words, aren't there areas of research that could be inspired by what we have learned in the Western school system and applied from a more African perspective? One obvious domain where this could be done, and it has not been widely done, is in sociolinguistics. One African scholar, Felix Ameka of the University of Leiden, once asked, suppose the devisers of sociolinguistics were Africans, what do you think sociolinguistics research would be focusing on? A possible answer to this question will be addressed later on in this paper. Now, because most African scholars have been molded by Western schools, and that they may not be in a position to sever their relations and start a completely new science, I believe we need to act like the Chinese, at least in the way they have used Western knowledge to get propelled as the second economic power challenging the US. For some of us who studied in the States some 20 to 30 years ago, we had colleagues and classmates of Chinese origin. At that time, I can truly tell you, students from mainland China seemed poor as compared to those who came from Taiwan or Hong Kong, for example. However, something that we observed is that once they ended their studies, they always went back to China. China sent a lot of students to study engineering. Upon their return, the government constantly supported them. We now know the results. China has become a world economic power. The moral of this story is that we are certainly right to study in Western schools, but we have to make an effort to master the knowledge and see how we can apply it to the needs of our own people in the continent. One other lesson we should learn from China is the spirit of observation. As one scholar once told me, Chinese people come to Africa. They observe how Africans make their handicrafts. They return to China and devise ways to produce in mass those handicrafts and export them to Africa. What happens is that those Chinese handicrafts are often improved and far cheaper because of mass production. The disadvantage is that the Chinese kill the subsistence economy of the Africans, as they then discourage Africans from producing their traditional handicrafts. The challenge for us: why can't we observe what our people do traditionally and find ways to improve it instead of letting Chinese take away and make use of our traditional knowledge? As you listen to me, you very well know that Africa is rich in such domains as herbal medicine, for example. Shouldn't we find means to valorize this knowledge and build our innovative science on it? One other domain that is a challenge to our present generation is the learning and eventually the revitalization of our mother tongues. We all know that the Western international languages we have inherited from our former colonizers have become ours to the extent that, unfortunately, some of our children, mostly living in urban areas, can no longer truly consider their ethnic languages as their mother tongues. Even for those African languages that are widely spoken, for example, Yoruba, Hausa, Igbo, Fulfulde, Lingala, Swahili, parents still believe that to get a decent job, children have to show a mastering of the foreign languages rather than the ethnic languages. While we all accept that these Western foreign languages have become our partner languages, we all recognize the need to also speak our African languages, as they are the ones that optimally reflect our African cultures. Some of these African languages, notably our ethnic languages, are indeed our identity languages. For the promotion of these African languages, governments have devised various means to promote them, favoring the widely spoken languages. While we certainly agree with the policy of favoring these languages, we know in our hearts that every African language should be promoted as an identity language. When I speak an African language, say Kinande in the DRC, I would love to be able to speak it, to hear it, to enjoy stories conveyed through this language, to listen to lyrics that reflect our traditional culture through language, to admire people who are still able to use proverbs and riddles that belong to our traditional lore to spice their conversations. As I've argued in Mutaka 2011, the great challenge is not that much that we have to be able to write these languages. I believe the great challenge is for us to be able to speak them, to use them in areas not necessarily covered by the domains where international foreign languages are used. Like Felix Marty suggested in the excerpt at the beginning of this paper, we should favor oral skills and make sure that every African language is promoted because it is the one that truly reflects the cultural identities of every single African. For a long time, our predecessors have convinced us of the necessity to be using our own languages, and some have even expressed the necessity of writing our PhD thesis in our mother tongues, for example. Something I personally have never understood, and I'm sorry to say it. When you try to obtain information from the family members of such venerable professors, you will notice that their children live in the States or in Europe. Some of those children are not in public schools where the majority of African children study. Most of the time, when they give a talk, they might start it in an African language, knowing that not everybody will understand what they say, and then the rest of the talk will be in English. I have always personally felt cheated by these venerable professors. At the same time, I know that with the ICT tools at our disposal, we are now able to speed up the learning and the speaking of our languages if we can find the right materials that push us to realize this. More specifically, I believe that with the use of iPads, iPods, and smartphones, it should now be possible to record interesting materials on our mother tongues that people are genuinely interested to listen to. If we can succeed to devise such materials, young people will find it a form of entertainment and will thus be interested to learn and hopefully practice their own parents' mother tongues. The challenge is now ours. Are we ready to devise such materials? In the third section of this talk, I will make proposals about the contents of such materials, which I hope would be the types of cultural materials that could be published by Sedotola and also archived by Alora to render them accessible to most people who have access to internet. 2. A few proposals inspired by work our Western partners would wish us to do as a complement to collaborative work done so far in the continent. By collaborative work, I mean work covered by the traditional domains of linguistics, that is phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, historical linguistics, typological linguistics, but also psycholinguistics, sociolinguistics, and the recent domains of documentary linguistics, anthropological linguistics, and so on.